Because, Stephen, without accountability for what Donald Trump has done this go round to the American people and American democracy, we're giving our republic away.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Steven Beschloss, and this is Six Questions. I hope you follow Six Questions wherever you get your podcasts. The Department of Justice was established in 1870 under President Ulysses S. Grant. The highest priority of its first Attorney General, Amos Ackerman, was fighting the murderous reign of terror of the Ku Klux Klan and its effort to frighten Black voters and undermine Reconstruction and the rights of newly freed enslaved people. The department was intent on upholding justice and the rule of law and the interests of Americans in need. Over the years, and particularly in more recent decades, the Justice Department developed a clear ethos of judicial independence, no matter which party was in power. Now that independence and commitment to equal justice without fear or favor has been replaced by an expectation of fealty to the whims of a vengeful and felonious Donald Trump. Todd Blanche, who's seeking Senate confirmation as the Attorney General, has made clear throughout the department that he expects Trump to be treated as the DOJ's chief client. This misguided focus has been exacerbated by an extremist Supreme Court supermajority that granted Trump near total immunity and has pushed rulings in the second term that further maximize presidential power. I reached out to Glenn Kirschner, a former federal prosecutor with 30 years of trial experience and a dedicated advocate for justice with his show Justice Matters. I'm counting on Glenn to help us better understand where we are, how we got here, and how much danger our judicial system is facing, given the lawlessness of Trump, the troubles of DOJ, and a highly partisan Supreme Court. So with that, let's get started. Greetings, Glenn. Great to see you today.
Good to see you, Stephen.
Thanks. So I'm so glad that you could join us to help sort through, where we are and how we got through and how we get through this stunningly lawless period in our history. Let me just jump right in with the first question. On a daily basis, you examine legal cases that are affecting America and often putting our democracy and the rule of law in danger. If you think back over the last 18 months since Trump returned to the White House, is there one case or maybe two cases, one or two instances of the regime's lawlessness that you find maybe most egregious, most dangerous?
Yeah, so when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So, Stephen, when you're a career prosecutor, former career prosecutor, I think, your interest is always in what's going on in the criminal justice system and how is the executive branch exercising the enormous power of the Department of Justice. So for me, when I saw the first obviously vindictive prosecution brought against James Comey, I can't tell you how long I had been saying some version of, I don't want anyone to suffer a vindictive investigation, criminal investigation, or a vindictive prosecution. But Donald Trump had been threatening to do what? Lock up his enemies. Who is the OG of Donald Trump's prosecutorial abuse wrath? Hillary Clinton. Lock her up, lock her up, lock her up for a decade. And yet, Stephen, even when he had the massive power of the presidency, he did not direct, as best we can tell, any vindictive prosecutions until James Comey, one of his first marquee perceived enemies. And when I saw that, I had been saying all along, I almost welcome vindictive prosecutions because in my experience with the judiciary, and I appeared before more judges, including more presidentially appointed judges than I could ever count, I predicted that the judiciary would, figuratively speaking, cram those vindictive cases down the throats of the DOJ lawyers unethical enough to pursue them in court, and more broadly, of the Department of Justice leadership and of Donald Trump himself. And we have seen, I'm always looking for the points of light amidst the Trump-induced darkness. We have seen so many vindictive prosecutions or attempts to vindictively prosecute. So, the prosecutions were obviously James Comey and Letitia James. They could not have fallen apart any more quickly than they did. But then there were the attempted vindictive prosecutions of Jerome Powell and of 6 members of Congress, including Senator Mark Kelly. They couldn't even get past the grand jury phase because they so obviously and transparently abused the power of the grand jury, issued subpoenas for improper purposes. And thank goodness, Stephen, the grand jury has been serving as the conscience of the community, as a bulwark against the Department of Justice's dirty leadership in trying to literally indict the innocent. Grand jurors have stood up and said, no, no, and hell no over and over again. But the defining moment for me, I think, was that one of the defining moments was the first attempt at vindictively prosecuting one of Donald Trump's perceived enemies or political foes, James Comey. And it went down in flames, as have so many other attempts.
And that's of course promising. And I take your point. There's a sliver of light in that because there has been a pushback. The grand juries that have responded in a productive way, in a way that frankly over 77 million voters didn't seem to grasp or maybe they preferred when he said he was going to be the retribution, warrior. He was going to be the guy who was going to act on his whims and his vengeance. So it can't come as a surprise to you, but I guess the point is that if he does one and he has the people in place, he's going to keep doing this.
Yeah, and I think with each successive attempt at vindictively prosecuting his perceived enemies that fails, Trump gets weaker and weaker and weaker. And his threats of prosecution begin to ring more and more hollow. He's like the boy who cries wolf. Now, it's horrible for the people he's pursuing. They have to spend money on lawyers. They have to probably spend many sleepless nights themselves and their families. But, they're being vindicated in the end over and over and over again. Yet Donald Trump continues to misuse the power of DOJ to go after his perceived enemies.
So in some way, you're leading me into the second question, which is about Todd Blanche, and who has in fact been a great assist in these vindictive prosecutions. Todd Blanche, essentially Trump's personal lawyer, his personal Roy Cohn. He's on tap this week for confirmation hearings to become Attorney General. Last week, over 1,200 former Justice Department employees described myriad ways that he's abused his role as acting AG, including the cover-up of the Epstein files, including the $1.8 billion slush fund for January 6th insurrectionists and others so-called wrongfully treated, and as you know, a series of vindictive prosecutions. The letter of those employees opposing Blanche noted that over 16,000 DOJ employees have departed, and he's installed there a culture of fear, where loyalty to Trump, not judicial independence, is expected. How much trouble is the DOJ in? How broken is it?
Yeah, it's in enormous trouble. And whereas 16,000 may have left, whether they were unlawfully terminated or they self-selected because they could not endure working for a corrupt regime, I do not call that obeying in advance. These are intensely personal decisions. And as much as we want good people to stay in government and be something of a guardrail, I don't think I could work for the Trump administration the second time around. I served under every president continuously, from Ronald Reagan to Trump in his first term. And then I decided it was time for me to retire. The DOJ is in significant trouble, but whereas 16,000 have left, there are still 90,000+ there. And those are career public servants who have never represented the interests of a president, any president. They have been representing the interests of the American people, as did I for 30 years. So I actually am somewhat optimistic that we can rebuild the Department of Justice once the rule of law comes back into the light of day. Hopefully that will be January 20th of 2029. I think what will be harder is rebuilding the public's perception of the legitimacy and the honesty and the integrity of the Department of Justice, and rebuilding the presumption of regularity, the goodwill that we worked so hard to earn from the federal bench, because Donald Trump, in less than a year, to put it the way a federal judge in New Jersey put it when Elena Habba was engaged in the shenanigans up there, in less than a year, a once storied office, the New Jersey U.S. Attorney's Office, has killed the presumption of regularity, the good faith that judges would show federal prosecutors that, they had worked generations to build, torn down in less than a year. So I think the perceived legitimacy by the public of the Department of Justice may take a very long time to rebuild. But listen, nobody said cleaning up after an aspiring dictator was going to be easy.
Right, right. And it strikes me that and part of it is trust. Part of it is also sort of reestablishing a belief on the public that there really is something called, equal justice, that there really is something called judicial independence. And I wonder, even given the number of civil servants, the number of people who are not just sort of falling over to the regime, I still wonder whether sort of shifting that culture is something that will take time.
It will take time, and I think we're up to the task. I intended to go back to the Department of Justice in the event Kamala Harris won, and she didn't. So now here I am on the outside fighting for the rule of law, the Constitution, and American democracy.
And thank you for doing that, by the way.
Yeah, well, listen, selfishly, this is a country I want to preserve for my kids and my grandkids and everybody's kids and grandkids. So, I feel like I'm kind of performing a public service now, kind of translating everything from legalese to English to try to meet the force of the lies and the disinformation, the propaganda being spewed into the public square by Trump and company every day. But I really do look forward to going back, hopefully after the 2028 presidential election, and be part of the cleanup mission and the accountability mission. Because, Stephen, without accountability for what Donald Trump has done this go round to the American people and American democracy, we're giving our republic away. And
yeah,
I'm not interested in doing that.
100%. And I want to get there. I mean, I want to talk about accountability a little bit later, but I want to linger a little longer on the DOJ and Todd Blanche, Deputy Attorney General, now Acting Attorney General. Is there, for you, is there one action amongst many of his violations that, for you, thinking about a confirmation, that's the most disqualifying?
So many to choose from.
Yeah,
I am kind of a victim-centric career prosecutor. And so the way he and Pam Bondi before him have been so disrespectful to the victims of Epstein's crimes. And, there are either hundreds or thousands of victims ultimately. And when you think about all of the crimes that were committed by Epstein and his criminal associates, the only person held accountable for any of them has been one woman, Ghislaine Maxwell. And Todd Blanche even tried to help her undo the responsibility for her crimes that a jury in New York placed on her. And so for me, I worked with so many cooperating witnesses. Those are people who committed crimes themselves, but they decide they want, they have a change of heart, or they have something that motivates them to begin working with the prosecutors to try to make right what they did wrong. And we then use them ordinarily to work our way up the criminal ladder to bigger criminal fish. So when I saw him sit down with Ghislaine Maxwell to listen to her about what she was prepared to say about her crimes, the crimes of Epstein, potential crimes of Trump, and so many others. When I saw him accept from her lie after lie after lie after lie, remember they got rid of the lead prosecutor in the Ghislaine Maxwell case, Maureen Comey, so she couldn't be there and be present to rebut all those lies and push back against Ghislaine Maxwell. He accepted lies like, I did nothing wrong. Jeffrey Epstein did nothing wrong. Donald Trump, pure as the driven snow. I'm paraphrasing. And so he accepted those lies without challenging them with the evidence that was used to convict her. And then he rewarded her handsomely by putting her in, club sleepaway, a club fed, where she's enjoying, I guess, Pilates and personal chefs and whatnot.
The cushy
That is
minimum security.
that is such an obscene perversion of the role of a prosecutor or certainly an attorney general. But it tells you everything you need to know about who Todd Blanche is aligned with, a convicted sex trafficker, and to the detriment of the many, many victims of the crimes of Epstein and company. So that is who Todd Blanche is, and that is disqualifying. And yet it is one of many. The weaponization fund, which, you know, he was just, I think, criticized for pretty stridently by a judge down in Florida. So many disqualifiers, as I see it, for Todd Blanche.
Is there an example of another, let's just say, another attorney general in our history that has been as aggressively loyal to the president as Todd Blanche is prepared to be?
You know, it's okay to be loyal to the president and his law enforcement agenda writ large. Listen, some presidents, and, you know, again, I served under many, and sometimes when you had a new administration come in, they're like, okay, we're going to pivot from, you know, violent crime. We're going to look more into drug trafficking and gun running. We're going to look more at environmental crimes and less at public corruption crimes. And so they would allocate resources accordingly. But, you know, in my experience, you know, those were the kind of shifting priorities of different presidential administrations that were sort of within their purview. They were elected, they get to bring their law enforcement priorities to the Oval Office. What they don't get to do, and they should never get to do, is direct prosecutions, not who should be prosecuted, who shouldn't be prosecuted, and certainly not using the power of DOJ to go after innocent people because they have displeased dear leader in one way or another.
Yeah, and by the way, and assisted a cover up to protect pedophiles and rapists and a whole collection of the rich and powerful.
Yeah, and look at all those. What was 1,000 FBI agents who were tasked with going through the Epstein files with a fine-tooth comb and finding every reference to Donald Trump. I mean, it's just such a gross abuse of law enforcement power. And what we know is Todd Blanche has been violating the Epstein Files Transparency Act every single day since December 19th. And he does it not just recklessly, he does it militantly, even proudly. And, you know, hopefully that's going to change with maybe Katie Fang's lawsuit over which Judge Emmett Sullivan is presiding.
So let me move on to the next. I want to sort of, in a way, sort of zoom out a little bit and speak sort of beyond the DOJ and talk sort of more broadly about our system of justice right now. How broken is it? How much do you attribute that to the highly partisan, extremist role of the Supreme Court? And can a lot of our troubles be attributed to their immunity ruling in July 1st of 2024 and the desire to hand Trump maximum power?
Yeah, that was also one of the most egregious Supreme Court opinions that has been handed down in my lifetime. And I don't want to compare it to, you know, Dred Scott or Plessy versus Ferguson or Korematsu, but it was, you know, just sort of horrible in a completely different way, because it was a ruling that, and let me just quote one of the preeminent constitutional scholars who is far smarter and more learned than me, Akil Reed Amar, Professor Akil Reed Amar, who said in the presidential immunity ruling, which is aptly named Trump versus the United States of America, because that's what we have been living.
That's
Trump
indeed what we've been dealing with for years.
He said in that legal opinion, the Supreme Court ruled that the Constitution itself is unconstitutional. And of course, they can't do that, but they did, because presidential immunity is contradicted expressly in at least two places in the Constitution, including the take care clause, that a president must take care to faithfully execute the laws of the country, not violate them with immunity from being held accountable for them. So, I mean, that has done untold damage. What was your original question before?
Well, I was really asking about the judicial system. How broken is it, and how much do you attribute it to the decision making, the sort of the reckless overtaking of the Constitution by the Supreme Court?
So another point of light, as I see it, is that the federal bench, by and large, has remained strong. It's the only branch of government that seems to be taking its check and balance responsibilities seriously. And the trial court judges in particular, from coast to coast, appointed by presidents as far back as Jimmy Carter, many Trump-appointed federal judges have been consistently ruling against Donald Trump day in and day out. That gives me confidence and a bit of a comfort level. The circuit courts of appeals have also held strong for the most part. So I feel like the federal bench has been up to the task of dealing with an aspiring dictator.
Right.
But you get up to the Supreme Court and all bets are off. Now, I was heartened on the birthright citizenship case, even though it was a bit of a squeaker, 6-3, yes, but Kavanaugh really wants to change sides and tried to give the executive branch a roadmap for how they can maybe go about changing.
A squeaker that should have been, 9-0, right?
Should have been 9-0. I also, when they overruled the Humphreys executor case, which said for, more than 100 years, I guess, the legislative branch can put some common sense legislation on the executive branch that serves as a check on potential executive branch abuse. And what the Supreme Court did, and the scholars say Chief Justice Roberts has been wanting to do this for a very long time. They killed Congress's ability to effectively serve as a check and balance against executive branch abuse. So what Roberts did is give Donald Trump a green light to basically become the all-powerful Article 2 ruler that Donald Trump has announced he wants to be. In fact, he announced that he is. He said Article 2 means I can do anything I want. And Chief Justice Roberts said, "You're right, Mr. President. I agree with you." That is going to be extraordinarily damaging because now Donald Trump can basically completely clean out the executive branch of honest public servants, and there is nothing constraining him. So, yes, the Supreme Court, I think all of this, Stephen, counsels in favor of us having to take seriously Supreme Court reform. It can be done. It has to be done.
So in fact, you've set up the fifth question. What reforms do you think are necessary for the Supreme Court? I mean, let's be specific.
Oh, specific. How about an enforceable code of ethics with investigative power if there is adequate evidence that they may have violated an ethical canon, and with an enforcement mechanism and consequences that come with violating the ethics that we expect of a Supreme Court justice, like complying with simple financial disclosure laws. I, every year, had to file financial disclosure forms as a Fed. They were the bane of my existence. We all hated doing them, but I'll be damned if I wasn't so careful. I didn't want to put one decimal in the wrong place and suggest that something involved 10 cents instead of $1. I was scared to death. I was going to accidentally make a mistake on my financial disclosure forms. And yet Justice Thomas uses as an excuse for not disclosing anything that he obviously was required to disclose, like $250,000 mobile homes that were given to him, or his mom's house being renovated, or his de facto son being put through college at billionaire expense. What did he say? Some of my colleagues told me I didn't have to. That doesn't ordinarily fly when you violate financial disclosure laws. So, we have to, so I do want to get specific, but we have to deal with what I call the ruling class criminals, the way we deal with some poor kid who snatches a purse or sells a rock of crack cocaine. We investigate the crime and we seek accountability. But when it comes to the rich, the privileged, the influential, and the connected, whether they're Supreme Court justice, elected officials, big pharma, big tech, titans of industry, big Hollywood, big banking, military industrial complex. You know what we do when we catch those folks committing crime? We give them a non-prosecution agreement. I've seen it over and over again. That's the opposite of accountability and responsible governing. You hold them accountable for their crimes, and we have never had an appetite to do that. We need to start doing it, including with the Supreme Court. So what we do is we just open investigations, first congressional investigations, until the rule of law comes back into the light of day, to look into these financial disclosure violations by the Alitos and the Thomases. And we use DOJ to criminally investigate Supreme Court justices who may have committed crimes, including lying in their Senate confirmation hearings, in their zeal to become confirmed and be able to do the exact opposite of what they told us they would do. And then the other thing is we have to work to increase the number of Supreme Court justices. I know that's a controversial issue, but as you well know, we have had as few as 5 Supreme Court justices in our nation's history. We've had as many as 10. 9 is not a magic number. 9 is not a constitutionally required number.
What's the magic number?
There is, I say 13, because, and it's not a magic number, but we have increased the number of federal trial court judges to norm for the increased population and the increased caseload. We have increased the number of judges on the courts of appeals to norm for the increase in the caseload. We have 13 federal jurisdictions. One Supreme Court justice is supposed to have some sort of loosely defined supervisory responsibility over each of those 13 jurisdictions, and yet some have to double up because we've not increased the number of Supreme Court justices to norm for the increased population and caseload. We should do that at least for that reason, and hopefully to address what I see as at least a handful of ideologues on the Supreme Court who are willing to depart from the express text of the Constitution to bestow more power on what is presently a corrupt president after they spent their whole careers trying to convince us, dupe us into believing they were textualists.
Yeah, and it's, by the way, it's worth noting that laws and rules are created to regulate behavior, and that should apply to a Supreme Court justice, just as it and the rich, just as it applies to everybody else. So I sort of take your point, and I mean, I think it's a question of how motivated Congress will be. Let's say a Democratic Congress come the end of the midterms to pursue that. Do you see it as a possibility, or are we really talking about 2029 and beyond?
I think it's 2029 and beyond. Well, listen, I do think Congress, depending on how the midterms go, will at least have the ability and hopefully the incentive to open legitimate investigations into so much of what we have been suffering at the hands of the Trump administration. And then we'll probably have to await January 2029. Now, will they have an appetite? Joe Biden didn't have an appetite for really dealing with the Supreme Court. He kind of pushed it to the side for reasons I don't understand, but I'm not a politician. I hope we appreciate the importance of it come 2029.
So you've led me into the last question, which really does deal with accountability. So given the scale of destruction and hostility to the Constitution and the rule of law by this Trump regime, it would be worse if not for the many judges who have stood up to the transgressions, as you've noted, demanded adherence to the law, and clearly stated what lawful behavior requires. Do you see this as the key to overcoming the regime's abuses, and how critical is it for accountability once the Democrats take back the majority?
I am fairly optimistic, given that our country has struggled mightily through other enormous challenges that we have faced as a republic, as a democracy, and we are still here. We're still standing, right? We haven't lost our republic yet. So I remain optimistic that we will rise to this challenge as well. And I already, what was the other part of your question?
Well, I mean, I really was asking about accountability, but also how hopeful, are you ultimately as a result of the number of federal judges that have pushed back, is at least an inspiration for the others who ought to be pushing back?
And I don't know how I could have just blanked on the accountability question, because I have been sitting here all day, every day in my studio in Northern Virginia talking about accountability. I think we blew accountability in 1974 with Richard Nixon. I mean, you can't put any nightmare behind you absent accountability. All you're doing is you're re-victimizing the victims of those crimes that have gone unaddressed, and you're giving permission to the next wrongdoer, a la Richard Nixon or Donald Trump, to do it all over again, because there is now a pattern of dropping the accountability ball. We dropped the accountability ball in 2021, particularly with Merrick Garland declining to act until the January 6th House Select Committee showed us all that there was a searing need to act and hold folk accountable for these crimes. And we did a good job, we being the Department of Justice, ultimately on holding the boots of the insurrection accountable, Donald Trump's foot soldiers, but we shit the bed. I think that's a legal term in New Jersey, at least where I'm from, on holding the suits of the hierarchy of the.
And it was just in time for the Supreme Court to come in and make it a moot point.
Exactly. So if we blow accountability for at least the third time, you can say the fourth time, go back to Reconstruction, but for at least the third time in recent history, we're not going to keep our republic. And I would argue we don't deserve to keep our republic. And I break it down to the micro level. As a career prosecutor, never once did I sit across a desk or a conference table or a kitchen table, because I like to go where the victims were most comfortable, to their homes, and say, the way you're going to heal, the way we're going to put what happened to you, what was done to you as a victim of crime behind you, is I'm going to decline to prosecute your perpetrator. So we're going to turn the other cheek. And how does that make you feel about the prospect of healing? That's not the way it works. So one thing that I have on my wall right across from me in my office and studio here is I have the numbers 4830. We talk a lot about the numbers 8647 these days, which is yet another vindictive prosecution against James Comey. I focus on 4830 because, I think Nixon's goons were probably feeling bulletproof beyond the reach of the law when they were committing crimes together with and for the benefit of a corrupt president. Once Nixon fell from power, 48 of his goons were criminally convicted and 30 went to prison. 4830, I think, is an important number to keep in mind, because when Donald Trump falls from power, it is going to be our sworn duty, our obligation, if we want to keep our republic, to hold them accountable for the crimes they are committing, in the harsh light of day right now.
Right. And one, I couldn't agree with you more. Two, I think there's been a long history of glossing over and just saying the new administration comes into power and they're more focused on moving on and looking forward rather than litigating what actually needed to be litigated. So I appreciate your point. I also appreciate that you're sticking with this issue, because I think it has to be one that's critical. So I appreciate your insights, and I'm not done with you yet. One last thing, a lightning round. It can be one word answer, or it can be a sentence or two. 6 more questions. Ready?
Let's do it.
What makes you happy?
My children and my grandchildren. I know that is the pat answer, but what makes me happiest in the work I'm doing right now is when I have people reach out to me in all kinds of messages on all kinds of platforms and one walked up to me at the gym yesterday and said this. His name is Paul, by the way. They say, I don't really know much about the law, but when you explain it daily on your YouTube channel or nightly in your Substack community meetings, which we have every night at 8:30 p.m. Eastern time, I understand it. I get it. That is the most reinforcing and motivating and gratifying and it makes me so happy.
What makes you angriest?
An absence of ethics in government service, in public service. We need a renaissance of ethics in government, because people are in those positions to serve the people. And they are, I'm trying not to cuss, they are being as disrespectful to the American people as is imaginable.
What is your favorite word?
At this moment in my life, it's accountability.
I think I might agree with you. What living person do you most admire?
Barack Obama.
What historical person do you most admire?
Abraham Lincoln. Be sure to put your feet in the right place, then stand firm. I have that on my wall as well. I had that tacked up on my cork board as a federal prosecutor my entire career. That's what we have to do. Put our feet in the right place, then stand firm.
What gives you hope?
The people who are engaging in the fight for democracy in all ways, large and small. And I would encourage everybody to find ways that comport with your comfort level to get involved. My wife, my better three quarters, who is a career immigration lawyer, now retired, her comfort level is postcard writing to encourage people to vote. And she and her friends get together and do that until their hands cramp up. Everybody can find a way that comports with your comfort level, but it feels so good to engage because, you know, justice is a team sport and we all need to be in the game at this point.
And everyone can do something. And thank you for doing something. And thanks for taking the time today. A pleasure to talk with you. I look forward to doing it again.
Great being with you, Stephen.
Thank you, Glenn.